Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. It's funny, I was thinking the other day about how we often see people make these amazing transformations in their lives, and you can't help but wonder, was it just luck?
It's a question that comes up a lot, right? Why them and not me?
Exactly. And it got me thinking about our own journeys too. Even with something like learning a new language, we know it's not magic. It's about putting in the work day after day.
And that's actually what led us to this fascinating YouTube transcript from the English Sleep podcast. Aaron and Evan, the hosts, were wrestling with that very question. What separates those who seem to effortlessly make changes and those who feel stuck?
Yeah, they started by comparing it to their own experiences learning English. They realized that their progress wasn't because they were somehow lucky, but because they took deliberate steps. So today, we're going to dig into the specific strategies and mindsets they unpacked.
Our mission today is to go beyond just saying, hey, change is possible. We want to give you a tangible understanding of how to actually kickstart that change in your own life.
Love it. So let's dive right in. From what I gathered, Aaron and Evan started by addressing those common roadblocks that hold so many people back.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest ones they highlighted was fear of failure. You know, that voice in your head that says, what if I try and I completely mess it up?
Oh yeah, that feeling of, what if I put myself out there and I just fall flat on my face? It can be paralyzing.
But they had a really interesting take on that. They suggested flipping the script and asking yourself, what if I try and I actually succeed?
It's about shifting that perspective from fear to
Mhm.
possibility.
Exactly. And they reminded us that almost everyone who's achieved something significant has also experienced setbacks along the way. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's a part of it.
It's like those setbacks become stepping stones in a way. Okay, so fear of failure is a big one. What other barriers did they talk about?
Well, another one that resonated with me was this feeling of not knowing where to even begin. Like you want to make a change, but you lack a clear direction.
It's like wanting to go on a trip, but not having a map or a destination in mind. You just feel kind of lost.
And sometimes that desire for a better future can actually become an obstacle itself. We get so caught up in wanting to have the perfect plan that we never even take the first step.
Ah, the perfectionism trap. It's like we're waiting for all the stars to align before we even dare to start.
And then, of course, there's the ever-present challenge of negative self-talk. You know, those thoughts, I'm just not good enough or I'm not cut out for this.
Ugh, those inner critics are the worst. It's like having a constant stream of negativity playing on repeat in your mind.
And those negative thoughts can be so insidious because they often disguise themselves as truth. But the reality is they're just thoughts, not facts.
And the last barrier they mentioned, which I think a lot of us struggle with, is waiting for motivation to magically strike. It's that feeling of, I'll start when I'm finally in the mood.
It's like thinking, I'll clean the house when I feel inspired to clean. We all know how often that happens.
Right. So the first step in breaking free from this cycle of feeling stuck is to simply become aware of these common patterns. The fear, the lack of direction, the negative self-talk, and the waiting game.
Precisely. Once you can identify those patterns, you can start to dismantle them. Okay, so let's say you've acknowledged these barriers. What's the next step? How do you actually initiate change?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Aaron and Evan introduced this idea of focusing on small, daily improvements.
Instead of trying to make these huge, sweeping changes overnight, they suggested embracing the power of gradual and consistent progress.
And they even brought up this concept called the 1% rule, which blew my mind. It basically states that if you can improve by just 1% each day over the course of a year, you'll end up 37 times better.
The math seems a little crazy, but when you think about it, it makes sense. They compared it to compound interest. Small, consistent investments add up over time.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by this massive goal you're trying to achieve, maybe your focus today is on taking one tiny, almost insignificant action towards that goal.
If your goal is to get in shape, maybe your 1% today is just doing one extra push-up. It's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent.
And they talk about how this ties in with the concept of habits, drawing on James Clear's Atomic Habits. He talks about how significant change doesn't come from these grand, sweeping gestures, but from the accumulation of tiny habits.
It's about focusing on building sustainable systems rather than relying on willpower or motivation, which can be fleeting.
Right. And what I loved is that they gave some really practical examples of those tiny habits. They suggest that reading for just 10 minutes a day, practicing a new skill for 5 minutes, or even just consciously replacing one negative thought with a more positive one.
They also shared an inspiring story about someone who became fluent in English simply by consistently listening to podcasts. It shows that you don't need some elaborate, rigid plan. Consistency is key.
So if you're listening and you're feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of change, remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Identify one small habit you want to cultivate and just start today. Take that first tiny step.
It's about making those small wins a part of your daily routine. Okay, so we've talked about taking action, but they also emphasize the crucial role of mindset.
Yes. They introduce the concept of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Of course. A growth mindset is the belief that your abilities and intelligence aren't set in stone. They can be developed and improved through effort and learning. It's that I can grow mentality.
And a fixed mindset is the opposite, right? It's believing that you're basically stuck with the abilities you have and there's not much you can do to change them.
Exactly. And those two mindsets have a huge impact on how we approach challenges and setbacks. If you have a growth mindset, you're more likely to view obstacles as opportunities for learning and growth.
You're not as afraid to try new things or to push yourself outside your comfort zone because you believe that you can get better.
And they also talked about how our brain has this tendency to focus on what we tell it to focus on, mentioning the reticular activating system, or RAS.
It's like our brain is constantly filtering information, and it prioritizes what we consciously or unconsciously believe to be important.
If you're always dwelling on negative thoughts, your RAS will actually start to seek out and highlight evidence that confirms those negative beliefs. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So it's like our thoughts can actually shape our reality.
Yeah.
And that's why they emphasize the importance of actively reprogramming our minds.
They offered 3 powerful techniques for doing just that: affirmations, visualization, and gratitude practice.
Affirmations are basically positive statements that you repeat to yourself, right? Like, I am becoming more confident every day.
Exactly. And that can be surprisingly powerful in shifting those negative thought patterns. Visualization is about mentally picturing yourself successfully achieving your goals.
And gratitude practice is all about focusing on the things you're thankful for, which can help you see the good in your life and shift your overall perspective.
It's about training your brain to work for you rather than against you. And they had another really important point about taking action. They said that many people get stuck waiting for the perfect moment or for that feeling of being completely ready before they start something.
Oh, that feeling of, I'll start when I have more time, or I'll start when I know exactly what I'm doing.
But they argued that that feeling of being 100% ready might never actually come. Sometimes you just have to take the leap, even if you don't feel fully prepared.
And they shared a personal example of Evan hesitating to speak English because he was afraid of making mistakes. But he realized that it was actually the act of speaking, even with errors, that gradually built his confidence. It's like we often wait to feel confident before we take action, but sometimes it's the action itself that creates the confidence.
And they highlighted a great principle: done is better than perfect. The pursuit of perfection can lead to procrastination and inaction.
It's like we're so afraid of making a mistake that we never even try. So for anyone listening who's been putting something off, the challenge is to just start. Take one small step today, no matter how small it might seem.
Whether it's practicing that new language for 5 minutes, starting that workout with a 10-minute walk, or just reaching out for information or support, action creates momentum.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Taking small steps, cultivating a growth mindset, and taking action even before you feel ready. What else did Aaron and Evan touch on?
Well, they also emphasized the importance of your environment. They argued that the people we spend time with and the information we consume have a huge impact on our habits and choices.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
And they suggested actively cultivating a supportive environment by seeking out inspiring people, joining learning communities, and reducing exposure to negativity.
Erin even shared a personal story about feeling stuck in her English learning journey until she joined a community of other learners. That sense of connection and support can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. So it's worth taking a look at your own environment and asking yourself if it's truly supporting the changes you want to make. And one final thing they mentioned was how expanding your vocabulary can actually help you better understand and articulate your goals and mindset.
It's like having a richer set of tools to express your inner world. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Erin and Evan's insights, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the core message is that you have more control over your life than you might realize. Lasting change isn't about making these huge, dramatic shifts overnight. It's about consistently taking small, deliberate steps, nurturing a growth mindset, and surrounding yourself with support.
Progress might not always be linear, but those consistent efforts, combined with a belief in your ability to grow, will ultimately lead to meaningful transformation.
And as you continue to reflect on these ideas, I encourage you to revisit the concepts that resonated most with you. Think about those barriers you might be facing, the power of tiny habits, the importance of your self-talk, the need to take action, and the influence of your environment.
And to build on that final point about environment, here's a final thought for you. Take a moment to consider the spaces, both physical and digital, that you inhabit each day. How might you intentionally curate those spaces to support the positive changes you want to make? What would it look like to surround yourself with more inspiration, more support, and more positivity?
It's an invitation to really take ownership of your environment and to create a space that empowers you to become the best version of yourself.
Thanks so much for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep growing.
We'll see you soon.